Hello there. I'm Dr. Terry James Gingras, and this is Dr. G's ADHD Chat, the show that strives to make the world safe for ADHD and the long-suffering parents. Okay, today, well, first of all, I better introduce myself. I'm a clinical neuropsychologist. I've been in the business for around 40 years. I have a practice that includes about 50% ADHD families, kids, adults, parents, all those. And I also am the parent of an ADHD child. And I probably mentioned this before, but when I was actively parenting, that is before everybody grew up and left home, which means I must have been fairly successful as a parent. Anyway, but my knowledge of ADHD was minimal. Didn't hear hardly anything about it in graduate school, taking psychodiagnostics, nothing. I just didn't, it wasn't considered a major thing, a major diagnosis. Matter of fact, there was a lot of doubt that there was actually such a thing, which is sort of interesting in spite of the fact that it's in medical literature, it has been written about since the 1790-somethings and has been well established as a diagnosis under a bunch of different names, but it has always been around. And effective treatments weren't really around until 1937, when some brave soul thought, oh, I know, let's give them stimulants. That, of course, must have driven the charge nurses absolutely bananas. Yeah, they were inpatients at the time. And but it worked, and therefore we know that ADHD brains are a little different from the brains of neurotypicals. And one of the things that was interesting to me when I was first starting out and said, I better start seeing some of these kids, is that the main treatment at that time was what's called behavior modification. Now, behavior modification is simply rewarding the behavior you want and punishing the behavior you don't want. In its simplified form, it's used to train animals, and it works with people in some respects. The problem was it didn't work very well with ADHD kids. You know, if your goal was that eventually they would recognize a situation and not do the banished behavior or the punished behavior and get right on to doing the rewarded behavior, never seemed to work out, and weren't really sure. And I will tell you right now that still there are tons of therapists out there that are doing behavior modification with ADHD children, and that's in spite of the fact that, like I said, it doesn't work very well. The problem is that the ADHD brain has a little difficulty recognizing, remembering, processing the kinds of information you need to make changes in your behavior. So, you know, you can punish them for the same behavior over and over and over and over again. And I'm sure many of you folks out there have done that with your children and have gotten very frustrated because it doesn't seem to change anything. And that's how come kids get reputations for being oppositional, defiant, and all other horrible diagnoses, which suggests that they are actively trying to irritate people in authority, as in parents and teachers. I was actually kind of relieved when, you know, the research started to suggest that there were other explanations for why behavior modification didn't work, or why they couldn't seem to understand the normal consequences of not doing what they were told. And now we know it's this, that the brain is just a little bit different at level. I mean, low level in the sense of very microscopic level. Brain responds differently to neurotransmitters, and most of the behavior that we find objectionable, like the hyperactivity kinds of and the impulsivity things, are designed to stimulate the flow of the neurotransmitters that they're not getting enough of. Hey, so what does that leave us with as parents of ADHD kids? Okay, the treatment that is most frequently recommended doesn't work. What's that leave us with? Well, when I started contemplating all these things, I started doing what I call strategic parenting. And strategic parenting is just the parenting with a focus on how you want your child to turn out as an adult. And not so much whether they get their homework done on time or make their bed or pick up their room, but that they're honest and responsible and have a reasonably good sense of self-esteem, if you will. And that long term is way more important than the little bitty obedience, do what I say because I said so kind of battles that frequently characterized ADHD kids in the home. Okay? That's what I call tactical parenting, is when you're trying to win every little skirmish all the time, and you waste all your time like arguing about whether they made the bed or not. Okay, point of fact, it doesn't really matter. My non-ADHD son always made the bed when he lived at home, but then we dropped in on his college dorm room, and oh my God. The bed wasn't made. Apparently, the laundry was all over the floor. And now he's grown and married and making sure his own kids pick up their laundry and make their beds and all that other stuff. But the deal was he didn't die because he spent 4 years living in a dorm room that looked like a pig, what my mother would have called a pigsty. It didn't matter. It didn't really matter. And with ADHD kids, if you spend all your coin, if all your energy fighting little tactical battles all the time, you're going to have some problems. Because I think the main thing you need to work on with an ADHD child, and the main thing you need to ensure that you do, is try to keep their self-esteem up. Okay? These are different kids, but they have some gifts, and we need to constantly remind ourselves that the gifts they have are the things we need as a society. You know, their creativity, their energy, all that sort of thing. A lot of times their optimism, because in spite of the fact that they have lots of trouble in school, lots of trouble getting along, they keep trying generally. They don't quit, okay? And that's a huge thing. And that's a real thing that you as a parent need to be ensuring. It's in some studies, if you will, some books, it's called resilience, but basically it means you just don't give up. You know, stuff happens, you fall on your butt, you get up and you try to figure out what went wrong, and then you go on to something else. You go on to some other solution to the same problem, but you don't give up. Okay, and that's what you're looking for. And to do that, you have to be reasonably optimistic about your kiddo. Okay, having an ADHD child is no picnic. I totally understand that. But one of the things that happens is they grow up. Okay, they mature. One of the things that we do know happens, that they actually do grow out of, is the overt hyperactivity. Okay? When they're in second grade, they can be running all over the room, yelling and screaming and tipping over the furniture and dip-de-dip-de-dip. When they're in high school, they're not going to be doing that. There can be some still, some subtle signs if you know what to look for, foot tapping, finger tapping, all that kind of stuff. But they're not going to be running around the room. Okay, that's part of what maturity does to them, or for them. And that's one of the things that we have to keep in mind. We need to be reasonably optimistic about these guys, okay, and girls, sorry. They will improve, sometimes in spite of us, but they will improve. And it's important, if we're going to get the most out of their talents and abilities as adults, we need to make sure we get them there with some feeling that they are competent, that they can do stuff, that they have some skills, some talents, some abilities that are going to be important. They may not be the ability to do algebra or organic chemistry, but something. They may be nowadays, maybe they're the world's best video gamer. I don't know, When I was a parent, that was just a time waster. Now, colleges have varsity e-game teams, and they give scholarships, and there are contests, and professional e-gamers, and you can make a lot of money playing video games, or what we used to call video games. Who would have thought? But if that's your child's big talent, and it's a way to make a living and get an education, or get an education and make a living, or whatever, would you stand in the way of that? I mean, if they had a 100-mile-an-hour fastball, you'd say it's probably okay to think about playing some baseball and maybe becoming a professional athlete. That would be okay. So if they can make a living playing video games and do that professionally, who are we to complain? So, but you need to be looking, as a parent, you need to be looking for your child's. Don't get tied up with the things they're doing wrong, because that can take up all of your time and energy. Look at what their talents are. What are their skills? What are their abilities? What do they naturally do? Okay, do they, like my son, he just was naturally a trader. I mean, in the sense of buy and sell, and I'll give you this, you give me that kind of thing. He could do that when he was 6 years old. I mean, it was amazing. And it was a little confusing for us as parents, because we never knew for sure what stuff was his. Where'd this come from? Oh, I traded Billy for that. And it's like, okay. I mean, and Billy's mother's okay with that? Oh, yeah, no problem. Okay, well, all right. But he was naturally able to do that. He could, it was a gift, and unfortunately we were more thinking about graduate school, something like that. But that was never his interest. And as far as I know, still isn't his interest, really. But whatever your child's talents and abilities are, it might be music, it might be sports, it might be getting along with people, it might be connecting people. Some people with ADHD seem to do that very well. They just, oh, you want some of this? Well, Fred has some of that. He'll probably be willing to, negotiate a trade with you or something. Or I'll do it for you. I'll negotiate it and dip-de-dip. Okay, so the deal is, you need to look for the talents. You need to look for the skills. You need to look for the natural interests, because that's where their future lies. And it's important for you to be sensitive to it. I think a lot of times as parents, we train our kids, or we have expectations of our children that are based more on what our parents' expectations were of us than of what the reality is and how society has changed. Like I said, I am really sure that nobody in my generation ever raised a kid that they wanted to be a professional video gamer. This wasn't one way we were taught, one way we were raised to believe that this was a valuable use of time. But if it works, I guess we've got to learn to accept it. And we've got to be optimistic about our kids, you know. Your child has ADHD. It's a difference, okay? They are different than neurotypical kids, and that's all right. That's not going to kill them. It's not going to, you know, excuse me. It's not going to be a guarantee of failure in life. It is just a different way of thinking about the world and what's important in the world and all that sort of thing. And we need to, first of all, as parents of ADHD kids, be optimistic that we can figure this out, okay? And it's not so much on us to figure it out. I mean, a lot of times with an ADHD kid, as long as you make sure that they're reasonably optimistic themselves about the talents and abilities, that they will determine where they're going. And it may not be the plan you would have for them, but hey, if it works, go for it. And that's what you've got to do. You have to be optimistic. Sometimes gets a bad rep, you know, and because it's not realistic, but it is realistic. The way we think about ourselves determines a whole bunch about how well we do in life. And if we are reasonably optimistic with the notion that we can handle things and we can solve problems, and there are few situations in life that we can't take care of or figure out some way to do, then that is not unrealistic. Okay, that's the best way to go. That will make us more likely to be problem solvers, creative thinkers, da-da-da-da-da. And that's, your ADHD kid's going to be a creative thinker, is going to look at the world in a different way than neurotypical kids. Enjoy it, endorse it. Be optimistic about it yourself, because that, in a way, is the more realistic of the two options. If you go around gnashing your teeth and say, oh, God, he's going to end up selling drugs on a street corner. No. That's not going to be helpful, okay? That is just not, and it doesn't work, but it does tend to make it more likely that you'll get what you don't want, okay? And I will say that, not in the sense of, one of these new agey kind of, if you just think about it, that's what you'll get. I mean, the deal is, if you think it's possible, then you can go after it. Okay, that's the big deal. And that's what optimistic in my little world means, that you are going to go after stuff because you have the reasonable expectation that you can get it, that you can write a book, that you can start a business, paint a picture, sing a song, write a song. That's optimism. That's reasonable expectations of yourself. That's got nothing to do with any cosmic magic kind of thing. It's got to do with the way people are wired, the way we are set up. It's sort of like if we are hungry and we're walking down the street in some town or city, all of a sudden every place that sells any kind of food is going to jump into our awareness. We're going to see it. We're going to smell it. We're going to think, oh boy, Same thing. When we see the world as full of possibilities, full of chances to be creative, full of chances to be problem solvers, all that kind of stuff. The world is a much nicer, better place. And your child raised that way, raised to be reasonably optimistic or to see the world as full of options, that's what you want, okay? And it's not always going to be fun and it's not always going to be pretty. But if they have that notion, if you've been teaching them that their entire lives, eventually they will be successful in some way of, thinking about successful. Okay, well, that got a little bit long-winded and a little bit probably hard to follow, because it's like, wait a minute, behavior modification. Anyway, in general, the way you think about your kid, the way you interact with your child, if you have the sense of optimism about your child's future and potential, odds are it'll work out better. Okay? And that's totally the simplest way I can think of to describe strategic parenting. But it works better than reward and punish kind of things. Okay? Because honestly, with an ADHD child, you got a lot more chances to punish than you do reward. And that leads to a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it doesn't work very well. Okay? So, let me chat with you again next week. This is Dr. Terry James Gingras. This is Dr. G's ADHD Chat. And we're working real hard at making the world safe for ADHD. Because remember, normal people don't change the world. And your ADHD child may just be the one that does change the world for the better. Okay, you can reach me at terrygingrasphd.com. And we're going to have a course or two coming out in the next 3 or 4 months. I will let you know more about that as we get closer to it. Okay, talk to you next time.